Welcome back. Eddie Radosevich, George Stoia here, Soonerscoop.com studios, and football's here. Oklahoma has wrapped up their first practice officially now. We're going to go out there on Friday to the to their second practice for our first, I guess, media viewing. Is that what you want to call it? But we're going to go over a couple of items here today. Just kind of, we're going to call them storylines. Is that what we're going to call them? Just kind of storylines,
questions, concerns, whatever.
Going into the preseason here as Oklahoma embarks Team 129. Obviously, bouncing back from a 6th and 7th season. I think everybody and anybody that is watching this is probably well aware of how disappointing Oklahoma's first season under Brent Venables was. But expectations are high. We talked about it on the recap show on the breakdown. We talked about it on the Unofficial 40 podcast this week, George. And first storyline, let's go Dillon Gabriel. He is obviously coming into kind of an interesting territory. I think he's a lot more comfortable going into this season, but at the same time, he has a lot out there still on the table.
Yeah, and it was interesting at Media Day. We didn't really talk a ton about Dillon Gabriel. I think everybody kind of just knows what you're going to get out of a guy like him. But, Jeff Lebby did say, hey, he's got to improve. I've got to improve as a play caller. It's going to be interesting to see. They were really bad in situational football last year. I wrote a story a couple weeks ago about, he was last in the Big 12 in fourth down completion percentage. I think 1 for 7 on fourth down. So obviously he needs to improve there. Third down was a problem. Accuracy. All those things are going to be something that you're going to want to watch with Dillon. And, hey, look, there's a new guy behind him, right? Jackson Arnold, everybody wants to see that guy. And so the pressure's on, whereas last year it was Dillon or bust. Sure. We saw that, right, in the Texas game. So I think the pressure's a little bit more on Dillon, but I expect him to have a good year. I know Lebby, again, we're going to play some audio here in a second, but talked about maybe finishing as a top 10 passer in college football history. I mean, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that, but this is a big year for him, and I'm looking forward to see what he looks like at practice tomorrow.
Speaking of Jeff Lebby, the Oklahoma offensive coordinator, obviously, I think it caught a lot of people's attention when he said this on Tuesday.
Yeah, I absolutely do. You can put a little more on Dillon, and again, he's now played a ton of ball, and this is a guy that, stay healthy. He's going to go. I mean, I would like to think he's going to be a top 10 passer in the history of college football. And that's something that matters. He's going to have a ton of production. He's had a bunch of production. He's got to play better. I got to call it better. We've said that. But that guy allows you to put a lot on the entire unit because he's played a whole bunch of ball.
So quite interesting comments from Jeff Lebby, and you actually dove into the numbers. It really is not out of it's not crazy to think that he could bump into that top 10 this year.
Yeah, easily. I think it's 2,874 yards, if I'm thinking off the top of my head, that he has to throw.
You better be.
Yeah,
you better be.
I know. I have it written down somewhere, but I'm pretty sure that's the number he has to get to move into 10th all time. Last year, obviously, I think he threw for around 3,100 yards and obviously missed some time to injury. So if he plays all 12 games, 13 games, 14 games, however many games they play this year, I think he's easily going to get it. And another person on that list that he might pass is Baker Mayfield. I think he's around 3,300 yards away from passing Baker, which would obviously be quite the feat. Landry Jones, the greatest OU quarterback of all time, though, sits in third. I think you'd have to throw for about 6,000 yards to reach the GOAT. But
wow, interesting.
But yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think about that. Obviously, he plays in a system that allows that. They love the long ball, lots of production. The bigger question mark is not how many yards he's going to throw for, but can he be better in those tough moments? They're going to play close games this year. When they need to go down and score a touchdown, can Dillon Gabriel lead them on an 80, 75-yard, 50-yard drive, whatever it is, to go win a football game? We didn't see that last year. And some of that was the defense, and we'll get into a little bit of the defense here in a second, but that's what you want to see from Dillon. He's going to put up big numbers. We all know that. But can he be that guy in crucial moments where he wasn't last year?
And obviously there was a lot of drop balls, and he put them on the money. And, you have the Marvin Mims episodes in West Virginia and Morgantown. It seemed like every time that it was coming together for him a year ago, something fell apart, or they were starting to move the football and they had penalties, or they had a turnover here and there. And, you obviously can't do that. And in close games, that's something that is going to be quite the key for Oklahoma. Storyline number 2 for Dillon Gabriel to be much better than he was last year, he's going to need a group of wide receivers who are unproven to step up. And Emmett Jones obviously talked about that on Tuesday when we met with the assistant coaches. And I asked him, there's so much talk about competitive depth. Your room has to be that, right?
You research me, I'm known to have a room full of guys. I'm known to be 4 deep at every spot, especially in fall camp. That's why I like to build that room up. I like to treat everybody like they starters. I don't care if you're a walk-on or not. Some of my best players since I've been coaching were walk-ons, so I treat those guys like they up for the Blitnikoff, so there's no favoritism in my room. And you invest in every last one of those guys where we can divide the reps up at practice, and that's the way I like to roll it. Every 2 plays, I try to get a fresh set of legs out there, unless it's just a certain situation at practice. But every 2 plays, I try to get a fresh set of legs out there, as you continue to do a good job of me gaining trust in you and Coach Levy gaining trust in you, and we able to continue to roll as an offense. I try my best to keep fresh legs out there so we can play with a max effort every time we touch the field.
So that was Emmett Jones, first-year Oklahoma wide receiver coach, talking kind of about his group. Obviously, we've talked about it on the Unofficial 40 this week, just as far as he's really, really impressive. Yep. There's a lot of passion there, but he's going to need to develop a number of guys this year. And, Jalil Farouk, obviously, is somebody that Oklahoma fans have high expectations for, moving into kind of that prominent lead role, taking over for Marvin Mims. Who are some of those other guys? And specifically on Farouk, what do you think about his season upcoming? Some high expectations for him with the Person Harvey comparison on Tuesday.
He's a guy that I think that there's a lot of high hopes for, obviously high expectations. I think he had 466 yards receiving last year, a few touchdown grabs, but he's got to take it to that next level. I mean, Marvin Mims was the leading receiver for this group the last 3 years. He was the only 1,000-yard receiver last year. Can Farouk get those numbers? Probably not, but can he be a 700, 800-yard type guy? What does he look like in different packages? I know we've talked about Gavin Freeman and some of the packages that they'll use with him. I wonder if you'll see some of that with Farouk. Are they going to hand him the ball in the backfield, reverses, things like that down the field? Is he a deep threat? I don't know. We haven't seen a ton of that. Obviously, Marvin was that guy last year and even the previous 3 years. So I wonder if Farouk can be that guy. But then you also bring in a handful of transfers. Andrell Anthony, there seems to be a lot of hype around him from Michigan. Can he be a guy that's a deep threat? I know he's kind of a burner. Brennan Thompson, another burner. Guy from Texas that sounds like he's going to be a contributor. Talk about the freshman Petaway. Lots of hype around him. Can he be a guy? I mentioned Gavin Freeman. You bring back Drake Stoops. It's just there's so many guys in that room that are just unproven. That's the issue, is like you want to say, oh, they have a lot of talent, they have a lot of competitive depth that Emmett talks about, but until we see it on the field, do they really? I mean, even a guy like Farouk, we've seen it a little bit, but can he be the go-to guy, right? We've only seen him in a secondary role. Can he be the guy that on a 3rd and 8 goes up and gets the big grab, right? Or makes a play to get the first down? We saw that time and again with Marvin, but can Farouk be that guy, or is it going to be somebody else?
What about a Jaden Gibson? It's kind of almost a little bit under the radar, just in terms of there was so much hype when he came in like a year ago, and then obviously he didn't play a whole lot. And I think there was a lot of people that went into the offseason and the spring wondering, is he going to be one of those portal guys, especially after the coaching change and how weird everything was around there. But obviously he signed up, him and Nick Anderson. It feels like they have to be some type of contributor just because of their bigger body in offering something that maybe the other guys, the other portion of the group doesn't have physically.
Yeah, and it feels like it's going to be one of those two. Last year we saw a little bit of Jaden Gibson, and I think a large part of that was Nick Anderson was hurt. I know Anderson played a little bit in the bowl game. We didn't get to see a ton of him. Gibson had some chances last year, and it didn't go his way. He didn't have a great spring, but can he be a guy that goes out and has a great fall camp? And like Emmett said, I mean, Emmett's coming in with fresh perspective, right? Obviously, he wasn't here last year, so he's starting from scratch. He went through spring, but he even talked about in the fall, which guys can step up. He's going to give every guy an opportunity, and I would assume one of Nick Anderson or Jaden Gibson is going to be a guy that contributes this year. Again, what does that look like statistically? I don't know, a few hundred yards, a few touchdowns, that'd be huge. I think it's going to be by committee. I really do. I think they might have one or two guys that are their go-to guys, but you could see 4 or 5 guys stepping in and having 300, 400 yard receiving years and just being contributors. And maybe that is a Nick Anderson. It sounds like he's as healthy as he's ever been. It was good to talk to him the other day. So it's going to be that's a position
There's
group.
just so many guys.
Yeah, I know. That's just one of those position groups that you're just like, man, how is it going to shake out? And I think it's one of those things we're not, and I've said this a time and again, we're not going to know maybe till the 4th or 5th game.
Right. I think they're going to be able to give a number of guys, and then depending on how camp goes, they're going to be able to give a number of guys opportunities early.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like one of those things when you're unproven, you got to do it when the lights come on.
Right. Well, and it reminds me of you remember in 2017, Hollywood Brown ended up being a great receiver for that group, but it wasn't until about the Texas game that he was playing a ton of snaps. So, could that be a Petaway? Could that be a Thompson? Like, who's going to be that guy that emerges halfway through the season that can be that guy?
We're going to have more probably on the wide receivers once we're able to talk to them a little bit more and actually get out and kind of see what they're up to out at the practice field. Storyline number 3, it's kind of one of those I think that's going to be a talking point probably throughout most of the season, or at least during the early portion of the season, and that's who's going to start opposite of Danny Stutzman at linebacker. There's obviously a number of guys that are kind of vying for that spot.
Yeah.
Connor Neer's one of those guys. We talked to him on Tuesday. Kobe McKenzie's one of those guys that's kind of, it sounds like starting to grow into his role a little bit. I think he needed that freshman year to develop physically and probably mentally as well to take on what that role is going to be. And the third guy, Jaron Kanik, who, obviously his story's been told hundreds of ways, but he goes into into a new season here where he's kind of starting to develop. There's obviously a man crush from Brent Venables, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, going back to his recruitment, right? I mean, he was obviously a kid that wanted to play for Brent. If you think back to, Jarenton, he wanted to come to Oklahoma. Brent wasn't going to let him. He was just going to come anyway. So there's obviously a really tight relationship between those two. And he's a guy that we saw flashes last year, right? And I think there was a lot of people saying, well, just play him. The issue is he's never played the position that they want him to play. And so I think that it's been a growing process for him. He's had to mature a little bit. Obviously, he's still only, 19, 20 years old, learning the position. And so it's going to be, he's a freak athletically, right? He's going to go out, he's going to make some big plays, but he's also going to be out of position at times. And Brent talked a little bit about that. So he's a guy that I'm definitely curious to watch because this is a huge camp for him because he could go out and he could win that job and be that guy from day one.
Brent Venables is a disciple of the Church of Kanik. Here he is talking about him on Tuesday.
His confidence, he's got such an amazing work ethic. He's very hard on himself, never satisfied, always wants to get better. So he's got incredible humility, just great toughness. You can coach him hard, but man, he's put the time in, and he's always in the film room, always working on his, in the weight room and the elite recovery, nutrition. He's a gym rat. He's always at the facility. Him and Danny are like Pete and repeat, freaking frack, and I love that. That's what you want to develop. That culture of real deep-seated brotherhood. You got to win in the mind before you win on the field, and Jaron has done that, and he'll have a much more significant role, and we'll see how that goes through competition and camp and those types of things. But he's earned the trust of the coaches and his teammates through his work and his consistency, and he's just got great habits. And when you have great habits, it leads to a lot of success, and I think that's what's in Jaron's future.
So that's pretty interesting. I mean, obviously, when you hear significant more playing time, it kind of gets exciting because it seems like it's starting to get real. It seems like they're ready to give him that responsibility. And, it's just going to be kind of interesting how that works. And, I think for somebody like a Connor Neer even, as long as he's proven it on the practice field, they're going to give him an opportunity. And I could see a situation where all three of those guys play opposite of Danny Stutzman.
Yeah, no, I think they're going to rotate guys. I could even see one of them rotating with Danny. I know talking to Connor, he said the two positions are sort of interchangeable. Sure. Obviously, Danny's going to be a guy that starts, I would assume, every game for them, but they want to get those guys on the field. Those three guys are guys that they seem to trust. Obviously, Kobe and Jaron are the two young guys. Didn't get a ton of playing time last year, so they're going to throw them out into the fire this year, I think. And again, both those guys, I think, have matured a lot, grown up a lot, and are learning the defense. They feel more comfortable in those spots. I mean, Kobe McKenzie looks like an athletic freak as well out there. I mean, he's a guy that stands out. And even Connor Neer. I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there that say, oh, Ferris State, Division II. he looked the part just standing. I mean, he's every bit as big as a Jaren Kanak and Kobe McKenzie right now. So I think that he's a guy that could come in. Maybe he starts game one. Again, it's just another rotational piece. And you think back to last year, they didn't have a guy after David Agwebu and Danny Stutzman. They had no rotation. Those guys had to play every snap at linebacker, whereas this year you feel good about 4 or 5 guys. I mean, we didn't even talk about a guy like Kip Lewis, who had a really good spring.
I was going to add him in, as well as, and depending on where they put him positionally, Lewis Carter has a lot of buzz because of what he's done to the weight room.
Did you see the photo of him? They did the weight photos.
Yeah, the weigh-in thing.
He looks phenomenal. Like, he looks like he's played college football for several years. And, we heard he repped 350 pounds 5 times. Now, it's one thing to be great in the weight room and another thing to go out and learn the defense. And, again, we saw that with Jaren Kanak and Kobe McKenzie last year. They weren't ready to play in that defense, but you have bodies there. Whereas last year, I think that they just didn't have the guys that they felt comfortable to play there.
There is an influx of talent in Norman, and obviously they recruited well, bringing in a top 5 class. Even with the 6 and 7 season, you also have a group of transfers from the transfer portal that is quite interesting, because you look at every one of those guys, and you wrote about this on Tuesday following the media day down in Norman. They need those guys to be contributors. They need a lot of those guys, and I don't think anybody's saying that like a Rondell Bothroyd needs to be all Big 12 first team.
No.
But if he's second team all Big 12, I think that that's a step in the right direction.
Well, and it again goes to, do they have to be great players? No. Maybe a handful of them will be, but it's more so they didn't have guys that could rotate in.
Sure.
All of a sudden, when Ethan Downs and Reggie Grimes and whoever else was playing all the snaps last year at the end, you bring in a Rondell Bothroyd, a Trace Ford, even a PJ Atabare, obviously, from the recruiting trail. Those guys are going to help. And then you bring in the spring transfers. You bring in 2 defensive linemen, obviously Terry from Tennessee. I think he's a guy that could start day one.
Right.
I mean, he's a guy that's played a lot of college football at a high level, played in the SEC, was very productive. Then you bring in Peya, I know he's been banged up, but he's a big dude, 300-something pounds. He's a guy that can come in, fill up the gaps. And so could he play a little bit? We already talked about Connor Neer. You bring in Brennan Thompson. We talked about him. So I feel like they feel that they have just more guys that can contribute and even just give guys a breather here and there where they just didn't have those guys last year. And so I think that's why they feel so confident is, again, we keep saying competitive depth, but it's true. They just brought in more talent that can compete for those jobs, but also just give them some rotational pieces.
It's certainly a talking point, but there is a plan. Like, there is a vision on when they're bringing these guys in. This was Brent Venables talking about kind of their ideology in the transfer portal, as well as just recruiting in general on Tuesday at Oklahoma Media Day.
That part is, different. And then again, I think we've made ourselves better. As I've expressed to our team after our last game, what my focus is and what I'm committed to bring into this locker room. I want them to have clear vision. I want my team to understand, the expectations, the values, the standards that I'm looking for in the recruiting process. And I need their help too. I might think one thing when I bring a guy in, and if he's not about the right stuff, which we had that happen with one guy, we got to, coach, that ain't it. And we took a hard left-hand turn. And, I value their opinion. They matter to me. And but I really feel like we've gotten better.
One of the guys that is coming out of the transfer portal was probably, I would say, if not 1A, he was 1B in Deshaun McCullough coming out of Indiana. Obviously, I think there's a lot of people that feel like he is kind of that perfect cheetah role for Oklahoma and what Brent Venables wants to be able to do. How does he fit in all of this, though?
I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I mean, that's one of the things, when we get to go out to practice, who's he working with? I feel like when we watched spring practice, every once in a while he was doing some things, with the ends, or he was doing some things with the safeties, or he's with the linebackers, and they kind of moved him all over. And I think that's that's kind of what the cheetah position is, right? He's kind of a hybrid role. What does he look like physically out there? But he's a guy that you've got to be super excited for. They haven't had somebody like him in a long time, and I think that he's a guy that can play multiple positions. I just don't know where he's going to play. I know there's a lot of people that think Justin Harrington's going to start at Cheetah. Maybe he rotates in with Justin Harrington. I don't really know, but that's one of my big questions is how are they going to utilize him? Because he's a guy that I think is just too good to not have on the field. I know Brent talked a little bit about him at Big 12 Media Days and said, hey, we don't want to rush him too much. So is he a guy that maybe we don't see on the field a ton until halfway through the season when he starts feeling a little bit more comfortable with the defense? So, but I'm excited about him. I think him, out of all the guys that got in the portal, he's a guy that you should be most excited about because maybe it's not this season, but going forward, that's a guy that I think can be a superstar. I mean, he was a freshman All-American at Indiana. I believe he led Indiana in sacks. So is he a guy that you bring in on special downs to come in and rush the passer? Is he a guy that's really good in coverage? I just don't know. And that's kind of the exciting part about him is I feel like there's so much potential there that we're waiting for that question to be answered.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how it all kind of flows. And obviously over the course of, the next 3 weeks with preseason camp and everything that, we'll be able to see and be able to report on, it's going to be kind of fun to see how this defense transforms itself because obviously they're going to have to take a step. They're going to need to improve from what that thing was a year ago.
Yeah, well, and it goes back to there's going to be so many new faces. I mean, we mentioned a handful of them, but Brent said, hey, we might have a whole new front seven other than Danny Stutzman.
That's crazy to think about too.
Yeah, and it's just like if that's true, how much better can they be? And last year just wasn't good enough, and they know that. And again, I think that when you talk about that, it's maybe a little bit scary to think that, they might have a whole bunch of new faces. But then you look back at what happened last year, like you probably need some new faces. You need some new talent. So that's what they went out and did in the portal. They're betting on that, right? It seems like they're putting a lot of chips in some of the guys they went out and got in the portal. So it's going to be fun to see. Guys are going to emerge, right? That's what happens in fall camp. Guys are going to emerge. And then even early in this season, you look at those first 3 games that you think Oklahoma should win handily. Who's going to be those guys that stand out and make their role known going into Big 12 play?
Right. And I think almost, too, there is like this aspect of there's so much talk about the transfer portal guys. There's so much talk about the new freshmen coming in. It's going to be interesting to see what guys from last year's team, the returning players, and I'm talking about the Marcus Striplings of the world. I'm talking about the Reggie Grimes of the world. And the list could go on as far as guys that played a little bit last year. They flashed at times. Yeah. But they never really gave you a lot. And, Reggie Grimes kind of fell off at the end of definitely fell off. It wasn't even a kind of after the non-conference portion and the early portion of the schedule. So it's going to be quite interesting. Lastly, we're going out to practice on Friday. What are you looking for when you get out there?
Yeah, I mean, I want to see how certain guys look, right? I mean, we talked about the weight changes. Sure. I know I tweeted those out a couple weeks ago, some of the defensive linemen. Do they actually look that much bigger? Does a Savion Byrd on the offensive line look that much bigger? We didn't even get into the offensive line. What do those guys look like? Who's healthy? Who's not? Those are some of the things. I want to see Connor Neer. Like I said, he looked good the other day without pads on. What's he look like with pads on? We get to watch a good chunk of practice. We get to see them run around, do some of those drills on air. What does Connor Neer look like sideline to sideline? I know speed's a big thing. What does a Deshaun McCulloch look like out there? Some of those things. And then also, who are your leaders? Because I do think that you can tell early in practice who are guys leading the charge, who are the guys going through the bags first, who's breaking down the stretches, right? We saw that some in the spring, but who are those guys that are going to be the leaders of this group? Because I think that's one thing last year too, that they had leaders, but I think it was somewhat of a question mark. Who are the guys that are leading this group? And I think that you can sometimes tell that in practice by some of the body language and those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to get out there and they're going to be the guys that you think, like the Woody Washington, Dillon Gabriel, Jonah Laulu's obviously kind of fit his role, obviously going to Arlington and taking or going down there with the rest of the group. So it's going to be interesting. Oklahoma football has opened up preseason camp. Stay with Soonerscoop.com on 3. It's going to be a lot of fun here over the next couple weeks because there is so much content to do. There is so much opportunity to be able to get out, see these guys, talk to them, and everything of the like. So stay with us here at Soonerscoop.com. For George Stoia, Eddie Radosevich.